My name is Sophia Merritt. Well, Sophia Caldwell now, I guess. And I want to tell you something nobody ever warned me about. Marrying into a billionaire family doesn't feel like a fairy tale. It feels like walking into a glass palace where every wall is a mirror, and every mirror is judging you. I grew up in a small town called Millfield, Ohio. My mom worked double shifts at a diner called Patty's Place, and my dad fixed cars in our driveway on weekends to make ends meet. We weren't poor. We were what my mom called proudly practical. We didn't waste. We didn't show off. We worked. I got a full scholarship to Northwestern University, studied business administration, graduated top of my class, and moved to Chicago at 23 with exactly one suitcase, a laptop, and $300 in my bank account. I was hungry, not for money but for something to build, something that was mine. That's where I met Daniel Caldwell. He wasn't flashing his last name when we first met. It was at a charity auction for literacy programs. I was volunteering, he was attending. He wore a simple navy blazer, no watch, no flashy shoes. He spilled coffee on my registration sheet and spent 10 minutes apologizing. I thought he was adorable. We exchanged numbers. We dated for 8 months before I even Googled his last name. Caldwell Enterprises. $32 billion in assets. Hotels, real estate, tech investments, media companies. His father, Richard Caldwell, was the kind of man whose photograph appeared in Forbes more often than in family albums. I almost ended things when I found out. Not because of the money, but because of what I knew money like that came with. Expectations, politics, invisible rules written in invisible ink that you only discovered after you'd already broken them. But Daniel was different. Or at least I believed he was. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony in Napa Valley. Small by Caldwell standards, meaning only 200 guests. I wore a dress I picked myself. I wrote my own vows. Daniel cried when I read them. For one perfect afternoon, none of the money mattered. Richard Caldwell shook my hand at the reception. Firm grip. Cold eyes behind a warm smile. "Welcome to the family, Sophia," he said. The way he said it, I remember thinking it sounded less like a welcome and more like a warning. 6 months after the wedding, Daniel suggested I join Caldwell Enterprises. He was heading up a new hospitality division, upscale boutique hotels targeting millennial and Gen Z travelers, and he said he wanted me on the team. Not as his wife. As a professional. "You have better instincts than anyone I've interviewed," he told me. "I need someone I can trust." I hesitated. Working for your husband's family company felt complicated. But the project was genuinely exciting and I had ideas, real ones. So I said yes. My title was Director of Brand Strategy for Caldwell Boutique Hotels. I reported directly to Daniel, who reported to Richard. From the outside it looked like a dream job. Corner office on the 14th floor of the Caldwell Tower in downtown Chicago. A team of 22 brilliant, dedicated people. A budget that didn't make me flinch. From the inside, it was a chess game where I hadn't been told all the rules. Richard never said anything directly negative to me. That wasn't his style. It was subtler. A comment in a board meeting. "Sophia, that's a creative idea, but perhaps a bit too unconventional for our brand." An invitation to a key strategy dinner that somehow never reached my email. A question directed to my junior colleague instead of me, even when I was the one who had spoken. I told myself I was imagining it. Daniel said his father was like that with everyone at first, that I needed to prove myself, that Richard respected results above all. So I focused on results. In my first year, the boutique division launched 3 properties. Austin, Nashville, and Santa Fe. All 3 exceeded occupancy projections within 60 days. Our social media presence grew by 400%. We landed a feature in Travel Plus Leisure that called our Austin property the most thoughtfully designed hotel experience of the year. I was proud. My team was proud. Even Daniel looked at me sometimes with this quiet amazement, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. Richard said nothing. Not a word of acknowledgement. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I wasn't doing it for his approval. But somewhere, deep in that glass palace, I was starting to feel the walls closing in. The second year at Caldwell Enterprises taught me the most important lesson of my professional life. In a family business built by one man's ego, talent is tolerated, but loyalty to that ego is required. I learned this on a Tuesday in March. We were in the middle of planning our fourth boutique property, a flagship location in Manhattan, the most ambitious project the division had ever attempted. I had spent 3 months developing the brand concept. I'd flown to New York 4 times. I'd interviewed local artists, consulted with neighborhood historians, hired an independent design firm that specialized in culturally embedded interiors. The concept was called The Neighborhood, a hotel that felt like it belonged to the city rather than sitting on top of it. The presentation was scheduled for the full executive board. 15 people around a long glass table, including Richard Caldwell at the head. I had prepared for every question. Daniel gave my shoulder a quick squeeze before we walked in. "You've got this," he said. I presented for 40 minutes. The room was engaged, I could feel it. Questions were sharp and specific, which always means interest. Our projected ROI was conservative but solid. The design renderings drew genuine reactions. Even Margaret Hale, the CFO who never smiled before noon, nodded twice. Then Richard spoke. "It's a lovely concept," he said, and that word, lovely, landed like a door closing. "But I'm going to have to be honest. Feels more like an art project than a business strategy. Our investors expect a certain visual language from Caldwell Properties. This is too risky." Kept my voice steady. "The risk data actually supports." "I've seen the data, Sophia." He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. "I've also seen 20 years of what works in this industry. Let's table this and revisit with a more traditional approach." The meeting ended. I gathered my materials. I did not cry. I had promised myself years ago that I would never cry in a professional setting, not because emotions aren't valid, but because I refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me break. But back in my office, my hands were shaking. My team lead, a sharp 29-year-old named Jordan, knocked on my glass door 10 minutes later. She'd been with me since the beginning. She'd turned down a job at Marriott's corporate office to join our division. "That was wrong," she said simply. "Your numbers were airtight." "Politics," I said. "It's more than politics," she replied. "He does this every time you get too visible." She wasn't wrong. I had noticed the pattern by then. Every time my work generated external attention, press coverage, industry awards, investor interest, Richard would find a way to redirect credit or create friction. A restructuring announcement that buried our division's metrics inside a larger report. A speaking invitation at a hospitality conference that was, accidentally, sent to Richard's assistant instead of me. Small things. Consistent things. I started documenting. Not because I planned to do anything with it, at least not then. But because I am my mother's daughter, and my mother always said, "Write it down because memory is the first thing people try to take from you." Meanwhile, I kept working. The Manhattan project was handed to an outside consultant, a man Richard had worked with for 15 years, who came back with a concept so generic it looked like a stock photo of a hotel lobby. The board approved it in 20 minutes. I smiled through the meeting. Took notes. I said "good point" twice and meant it 0 times. At home, Daniel and I were having quieter evenings. Not cold, just quieter. He knew something was wrong. I think he also knew on some level what it was, and that knowing made him uncomfortable in a way he didn't know how to name. "My dad respects you," he said one night, not looking up from his phone. "He respects my output when he can take credit for it," I said. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Give it time," he finally said. I had been giving it time. I had been giving it 18 months of 70-hour weeks, of swallowed frustrations, of smiling across conference tables at a man who had decided before I walked through the door that I would always be a guest in his world. Useful, decorative, temporary. The thing about glass palaces is this. They look permanent from the outside. But glass breaks. And the moment you realize you're not afraid of the sound anymore, that's the moment everything changes. I didn't know it yet, but that moment was coming. And it was coming fast. I want to tell you about the morning of April 14th because that date is burned into me the way certain dates just are. The way you remember exactly what you were wearing, exactly what the light looked like, exactly how the air felt before everything changed. I woke up at 5:47 a.m. I know because I looked at my phone and had 17 unread emails, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that the first one was from Richard Caldwell's personal assistant, Diane, sent at 11:59 p.m. the night before. Mr. Caldwell requests your presence in his private office at 9 a.m. sharp. Please confirm receipt. No context. No subject line detail. Just that. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom Daniel and I shared in our Lincoln Park townhouse. Daniel was already gone. He had early morning calls with an overseas partner on Tuesdays. The bed felt very large and very quiet. Confirmed receipt. Showered. I chose my outfit carefully. A charcoal blazer, structured trousers, my mother's small gold earrings that I wore whenever I needed to feel grounded. I made coffee I didn't drink. I drove to Caldwell Tower in silence. No music, no podcast. Just the sound of Chicago waking up around me. I arrived at 8:40. Diane gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes and told me to wait. I sat in the chair outside Richard's office for exactly 19 minutes. I know because I counted. It was the kind of waiting that's designed to unsettle you, and I refused to be unsettled, so I sat with my back straight and my hands folded and I thought about my mother carrying plates at Patty's place at 6 in the morning and I thought, you have survived harder rooms than this. At 9:01 the door opened. Richard's office was everything you'd expect from a man who had spent 40 years building an empire to impress himself. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. A desk the size of a small country. Framed magazine covers featuring his own face. A single orchid on the corner table, white and perfect and somehow aggressive. He was standing when I entered. That was unusual. Richard Caldwell always sat when you came to him. It was a power thing, making you stand while he remained comfortable. The fact that he was standing told me this wasn't going to be a slow conversation. Sophia. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit down. Sep. He remained standing. So much for that theory. I'm going to be direct with you, he said. I've been reviewing the divisional structure, and I've made a decision about the boutique hotels team. My heart was steady. I had rehearsed for this conversation in some version or another for months. I'm listening. I'm restructuring the division under a new leadership model. Your position as Director of Brand Strategy is being eliminated. Effective today. Just like that. No preamble. No performance review. No HR representative in the room, which I noted immediately because I knew enough about employment law to know that was intentional. This was Richard Caldwell operating in his own kingdom by his own rules. Effective today, I repeated. Your severance package is generous. Diane has the paperwork. He finally moved, walking around to his side of the desk, sitting down. Conversation over in his mind. I want this transition to be smooth and professional. I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had shaken my hand at my own wedding. This man whose son I had loved genuinely and completely. This man who had watched me build something real and beautiful and profitable and had spent 2 years systematically making sure no one knew it was mine. Can I ask what the stated reason is? Said. My voice was completely calm. I was proud of that. Strategic restructuring, he said. And Daniel knows about this decision. The smallest flicker crossed his face. This is a business decision. Which meant no. Daniel did not know. Or if he did, he had said nothing to me, and I wasn't sure which version was worse. Understood. I straightened my blazer. Picked up my bag. Thank you for your time, Richard, I said. And I walked out. I walked past Diane without stopping. I stepped into the elevator and pressed 14. My floor, my team's floor. The elevator was empty. For those 30 seconds between the top floor and mine, I let myself feel it. Not cry, just feel. The anger, the exhaustion, the strange relief that comes when something you've been dreading finally arrives and you realize you're still standing. The doors opened. I walked out. And 22 people looked up from their desks. I want to be honest with you about what happened next, because I think people expect a dramatic speech. A rallying cry. Some cinematic moment where I stood on a desk and said something unforgettable. That's not what happened. What happened was Jordan. She was standing at the whiteboard in the open workspace area when I walked out of the elevator, marker in hand, mid-sentence about Q3 projections. She looked at my face. Just my face, nothing else, and she put the marker down. "He fired you," she said. Not a question. I didn't insult her with a denial. Restructuring. Effective today. The room went very quiet. 22 people. Designers, analysts, marketing coordinators, project managers. All the brilliant, hard-working individuals who had poured themselves into this division with me. People who had turned down other offers. People who had worked weekends in Nashville and late nights in Austin because they believed in what we were building. Jordan looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at the room. "I'm not staying," she said simply. To me, to the room, to no one in particular. Marcus, our lead data analyst, closed his laptop. The sound of it was very loud in the silence. "Neither am I," he said. And then, I cannot fully explain what it felt like to watch this happen. One by one, quietly, without drama, without anyone asking them to, my team began to shut down their computers. Some reached for their bags. Some just stood up. No shouting. No grand gestures. Just 22 people making a decision with the same quiet certainty I had felt in Richard's office 6 minutes earlier. I held up my hand. "Stop," I said. "I need everyone to stop for a second." They stopped. "I need you to understand what you're doing," I said. My voice was steady, but I meant every word with everything I had. "This is your career. Your livelihood. Some of you have mortgages, student loans, families. I will not let you make this decision in a moment of emotion. You need to think about this." Jordan crossed her arms. "I have thought about it. I've been thinking about it since the Nashville launch when he took the Forbes interview and didn't mention your name once." A few murmurs around the room. They'd all noticed things. They'd all been noticing things and saying nothing, the way you do when you're not sure if what you're seeing is real. "He's going to claim we abandoned our contracts," I said. "He has lawyers. So does the National Labor Relations Board," said a voice from the back. It was Priya, our youngest team member, 24 years old, 18 months out of Wharton. She was already on her phone. "I'm looking up whistleblower protections right now." I looked at all of them. These people who had chosen this work, chosen this team, chosen, in some quiet way, to choose me. "If you do this," I said carefully, "you need to do it for yourselves, not for me. I need to know every single person in this room is walking out because it's right for them, not out of loyalty." Marcus looked up. "Can't it be both?" I didn't have an answer for that. So I turned toward the elevator. Pressed the button. The doors opened. And behind me, I heard 22 pairs of footsteps. We walked through the lobby of Caldwell Tower together. The security guards watched. The receptionist watched. 3 people in expensive suits near the entrance watched. I kept my eyes forward, my chin level, my mother's gold earrings catching the morning light as we pushed through the glass doors and stepped out onto Michigan Avenue. The Chicago wind hit us all at once. Sharp and cold and completely indifferent to billionaires and fired directors and everything that had just happened on the 14th floor. Jordan fell into step beside me. "So," she said. "What now?" I took a breath of cold April air. "Now," I said, "we build something they can't take credit for. There is something nobody tells you about starting over at 31. It is terrifying and clarifying in equal measure. Like standing at the edge of something very high and realizing the fear and the freedom are the exact same feeling." The day after we walked out of Caldwell Tower, I sat at my kitchen table in Lincoln Park with a legal pad, a cold cup of coffee, and exactly one clear thought. I will not waste this. Daniel had come home late the previous night. We had talked, or something that resembled talking. He sat across from me at that same kitchen table and he looked like a man caught between 2 versions of himself, which I suppose is exactly what he was. "He didn't tell me," Daniel said. "I want you to know that." "I believe you," I said. And I did. That was almost the saddest part. I'm going to talk to him. I'll fix this. I looked at my husband, this man I had genuinely loved, this man who had cried at our wedding vows, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not hatred, not even anger. Something quieter and more permanent. Daniel, I said gently. You've been going to talk to him for 2 years. He didn't have an answer for that either. I didn't make any decisions about my marriage that night. Some things are too important to decide while you're still bleeding. But I knew, sitting across from him in our beautiful Lincoln Park kitchen, that something structural had changed between us. Something that no conversation with Richard Caldwell was going to repair. I slept 4 hours. I woke up and I opened my legal pad. By 9 a.m., Jordan was at my door with 2 coffees and her personal laptop. By 10, Marcus had sent a group message asking when and where we were meeting. By noon, 8 members of the team were sitting in my living room. I want to tell you what that looked like. 8 people on couches and kitchen chairs and the floor, laptops open, talking over each other with a specific energy of people who have been holding back ideas for too long. Because that's what it was. All those months of let's table this, and Richard prefers a more traditional approach. It had all been building pressure, and now the valve was open. The Manhattan concept, Jordan said immediately. The neighborhood. We own that idea. It was never formally adopted by Caldwell, which means it was never legally theirs. Priya looked up from her laptop. I checked. It wasn't included in any signed project documentation. It existed only in Sophia's presentation materials. I sat very still. You're saying we could develop it independently. I'm saying we already have, Jordan replied. 3 months of research, community interviews, design frameworks. All on your personal drive. All predating any Caldwell involvement. It's yours. I thought about that for a long moment. Here's what I knew. I had connections. 2 years of building relationships with investors, designers, local developers, and hospitality industry contacts who respected the work, not the Caldwell name attached to it. I had the Austin Properties' original lead developer, a woman named Carmen Reyes, who had told me privately at our launch dinner that she'd follow my next project anywhere. I had a contact at a boutique investment firm in New York who had attended our Nashville opening and sent a handwritten note saying it was the most exciting hotel concept he'd encountered in a decade. What I didn't have was capital. Not the Caldwell kind anyway. We need to think about this carefully, I told the room. Starting an independent hospitality company requires funding, legal structure, operational infrastructure. We can't do this on coffee and loyalty. We can do the first part on coffee and loyalty, Marcus said. The rest we build. Over the next 3 weeks, I worked harder than I had ever worked in my life. And I had worked very hard my entire life, so that is not a small statement. I incorporated a new company, Merit Hospitality Group, because I was done hiding behind other people's last names. Jordan became my co-founder. Priya led legal structure research. Marcus built our financial modeling from scratch. The others, all 22, every single one of them, committed to joining once funding was secured, taking on freelance and contract work in the meantime to stay afloat. I called Carmen Reyes on a Thursday afternoon. She picked up on the second ring. I heard what happened, she said before I could speak. I've been waiting for your call. 3 days later I flew to New York and had coffee with the investment contact. His name was Thomas Hale, no relation to the Caldwell CFO, in a small place in the West Village. I presented the neighborhood concept on a tablet. No boardroom, no glass table, no orchid in the corner. He asked 4 questions. Sharp, specific, serious questions. Then he said, "What do you need to make this real?" Told him. He nodded slowly. "I have 2 partners who need to hear this. Can you come back Friday?" I flew home, sat at my kitchen table, and looked at the legal pad where this had all begun 3 weeks ago. The page was almost full now. Names, numbers, timelines, contingencies. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Dad wants to meet. He says he made a mistake." I set the phone face down on the table. I picked up my pen and turned to a fresh page. Friday came the way important days always do. Ordinary on the surface, the city completely indifferent to what you're walking into. I took the 7 a.m. flight from O'Hare to JFK. Window seat. I watched Chicago shrink beneath the clouds, and I thought about the girl who had arrived in this city 8 years ago with one suitcase and $300. I thought about what she had wanted. Not wealth, not status, just something to build. Something real. You're about to find out if you built it, I told her. Thomas Hale's office was in a converted loft space in the Flatiron district. Exposed brick, large windows, the kind of space that signals money comfortable enough not to perform itself. He met me at the door with a handshake and introduced me to his two partners. A woman named Grace Okafor, who had spent 15 years in luxury real estate development, and a man named Sam Park, who had backed 3 boutique hotel concepts that were now considered industry benchmarks. These were not people who needed to be impressed. These were people who needed to be convinced. I set up my presentation on their conference table. Same concept, same research, same numbers. But this version had 3 additional weeks of refinement built into it. Carmen Reyes had sent updated construction cost estimates. Priya had restructured the financial projections with 3 scenario models. Marcus had built a competitive analysis so thorough it was practically its own document. I presented for 50 minutes. I did not rush. I did not apologize for the ambition of the numbers. I did not soften the concept to make it feel safer. Halfway through, Grace Okafor leaned forward. The community integration model, she said. You're proposing that a percentage of hotel revenue goes directly back into neighborhood arts funding? 15% of net profit, structured as a dedicated community trust, I said. Not as a PR mechanism, as a founding principle. The hotel exists because the neighborhood exists. The finances should reflect that. She looked at Sam Park. Something passed between them that I couldn't fully read but felt like recognition. The questions afterward were thorough and direct and lasted 40 minutes. I answered every single one. When I didn't have a precise number, I said so and explained my methodology for arriving at an estimate. When they pushed back on a projection, I showed my work. I did not bluff. I did not overpromise. At the end, Thomas Hale folded his hands on the table. We'd like to lead the seed round, he said. Subject to due diligence and term sheet agreement. The number he put forward was enough to launch the Manhattan property, retain my full team, and build 6 months of operational runway. I kept my face professional. Inside, something that had been wound very tight for a very long time quietly released. I'd like to review the term sheet with counsel, I said. But I'm very interested in moving forward. We shook hands. I walked out onto Fifth Avenue and stood on the sidewalk for a moment with a New York noise washing over me. Taxis and conversations and someone playing saxophone on the corner. And I called Jordan. Well, she said immediately. They're in, I said. Her scream was loud enough that the woman walking past me turned to look. The following weeks moved fast. Term sheet negotiation, legal review, formal funding close. I found a New York attorney named Rebecca Walsh who specialized in hospitality startups and was exactly as sharp as her reputation suggested. The due diligence process was thorough. Thomas Hale's firm did not invest carelessly, and we passed every stage. We secured the Manhattan property site in the East Village. A former textile warehouse with original brick walls and enormous industrial windows, and exactly the kind of bones that the neighborhood concept needed. Carmen Reyes flew in to walk the space with me. She ran her hand along one of the original brick walls and said quietly, "This is going to be something." I stood in the middle of that empty warehouse. Dusty floors, afternoon light coming through the tall windows, the noise of the city outside. And I thought about Richard Caldwell's office. The orchid. The framed magazine covers. The carefully constructed world of a man who believed ownership was the same thing as creation. He had fired me to protect his empire. Instead, he had freed me to build my own. Back in Chicago, I finally had the conversation with Daniel I had been carefully not having for weeks. We sat at the kitchen table, our table, the one that had witnessed so many of the important moments of our marriage. And we were honest with each other in a way that we perhaps should have been much sooner. "I love you," Daniel said. "That part has never been the question." "I know," I said. But love isn't the only question. We talked for 3 hours. About Richard, about the 2 years of silence between us about what was happening, about the ways we had each accommodated things we shouldn't have accommodated. It was a sad conversation but not a bitter one. The end of something real doesn't have to be ugly to be an ending. I moved into a furnished apartment in Wicker Park the following week. Clean lines, good light, my mother's gold earrings on the bathroom shelf. The Merit Hospitality Group officially opened its New York office 30 days later. 22 people, one warehouse in the East Village. One concept that Richard Caldwell had called too risky. Jordan stood in the middle of the empty office space on our first day, looked around and grinned. "The neighborhood," she said like she was tasting the name. "The neighborhood," I confirmed. Outside, New York carried on as it always does. Enormous and indifferent and full of people building things in empty rooms, betting on themselves, refusing to let someone else's fear become their ceiling. I was one of them now. Finally, completely, irreversibly. I was one of them. There is a photograph on my office wall. Not a framed magazine cover, not an award certificate, not a rendering of some future project. Just a photograph taken by Marcus on a rainy Tuesday morning, of 23 people standing in front of a half-renovated warehouse in the East Village. Everyone is slightly damp. Jordan is laughing at something off-camera. Priya is holding 2 coffee cups and looking extremely serious. I am standing in the middle, no blazer, hair pulled back, paint dust on my sleeve from where I had been helping Carmen's team test wall finishes an hour earlier. We look like people in the middle of something hard. We look like people who wouldn't trade it for anything. That photograph was taken 14 months before the neighborhood hotel opened its doors. 14 months of construction delays, budget recalibrations, permit battles, vendor negotiations, and approximately 10,000 decisions ranging from the weight of the bath towels to the specific temperature of the lobby lighting. 14 months of weekly team calls that sometimes ran 3 hours. 14 months of Jordan and I sitting across from each other at the end of long days saying, "Is this actually going to work?" and answering yes, not because we were certain but because certainty was a luxury and momentum was what we actually had. Let me tell you about the day the neighborhood opened. It was a Thursday in October, clear sky, that particular New York autumn light that makes the city look like someone turned up the contrast on everything. We had a soft opening, deliberately understated. No red carpet, no celebrity guests, no staged press moment. Just the hotel, open, ready, exactly what we had said it would be. The ground floor gallery featured work by 7 East Village artists, all of whom had studios within 4 blocks of the property. The restaurant menu was built around 3 neighborhood food vendors who had operated in the area for over a decade. The lobby playlist had been curated by a local record shop owner who had lived on the block for 22 years. Every single design element connected back to the place, not as decoration but as documentation. This neighborhood had a life before we arrived, and the hotel existed to honor it, not replace it. By the end of the first weekend, we had 11 press inquiries. By the end of the first month, we had a waiting list for weekend bookings running 6 weeks out. The New York Times travel section ran a piece with the headline, "The hotel that actually belongs here." Thomas Hale sent a single text. "Well done." Grace Okafor called personally. "I've been in this industry for 15 years, she said. I've never seen a concept land this cleanly on first execution. I was sitting on the floor of my office when she called. We hadn't gotten around to buying proper furniture yet. Eating a sandwich, surrounded by binders and fabric samples and Marcus's latest occupancy projections. Thanked her. I meant it genuinely. Then I called my mom. She picked up on the second ring the way she always does, and I told her the review was out, and she was quiet for a moment in the way she gets quiet when she's trying not to cry, and then she said, "Baby, I always knew." I thought about her carrying plates at Patty's place. I thought about my dad fixing cars in the driveway. I thought about the specific dignity of people who work hard in rooms where nobody is watching and never once ask for applause. This one's for you, I thought. 6 months after opening, Merit Hospitality Group announced its second property, a boutique hotel in New Orleans, same community-first model, same founding principles. Carmen Reyes led construction. Jordan led brand development. Our team had grown from 22 to 31, And every single person who had walked out of Caldwell Tower with me was still there, building something that belonged to all of us in the way that only things you've genuinely risked something for ever truly do. I heard about Richard Caldwell exactly once during this period. A mutual contact mentioned, almost in passing, that the Manhattan property Caldwell Enterprises had developed, the one that replaced my concept, the one the outside consultant had designed, had opened to polite reviews and disappointing occupancy numbers. The Travel Plus Leisure piece described it as competent but forgettable. I did not feel triumphant when I heard this. I want to be honest about that because I think we're supposed to feel triumphant in these moments and the truth is more complicated. What I felt was something closer to tired sadness, for the wasted potential, for the people who had worked on that project, for the version of things that could have been different if one man's ego had been slightly smaller. Richard Caldwell had not built a bad hotel out of malice. He had built a forgettable one out of fear. Fear of something new, fear of credit belonging to someone he couldn't fully control. Fear dressed up as tradition, as caution, as business sense. I had spent 2 years being diminished by that fear. I refused to carry it forward. Daniel and I finalized our divorce quietly, without bitterness, in the spring. We had loved each other genuinely. We had also wanted different things in ways that only became visible under pressure, which is perhaps the most honest way a marriage can end. He sent flowers when the neighborhood opened. I sent a handwritten note when I heard he had left Caldwell Enterprises to start his own venture fund. We were kind to each other. Kindness, I have learned, is not the same as staying. On the 1-year anniversary of our opening, I gathered the full Merit team, all 31 of us by then, in the hotel lobby after closing time. Someone had brought champagne. The East Village artists whose work lined our walls had left pieces behind when their show rotated out. Small gifts, tokens of something that felt like genuine belonging. I stood in front of these people and I thought about what I wanted to say. I thought about Richard's office and the orchid and the framed magazine covers. I thought about elevator doors opening on the 14th floor and 22 people looking up. I thought about a rainy Tuesday, a half-renovated warehouse, a photograph on my wall of people in the middle of something hard. I want to say something that isn't a speech, I said. I'm bad at speeches. Jordan predictably laughed. I just want you to know that none of this, not 1 square foot of this place, not one booking, not one article, not one thing we have built, exists without the specific choice each of you made on a Tuesday morning in April when you didn't have to do anything except keep your heads down and keep your jobs. Pause. You chose something harder. And because of that choice, we get to stand in this room. The champagne was poured. The room was warm and loud and full of people who had earned the right to celebrate. Outside, the East Village carried on, the way neighborhoods do, indifferent and alive, full of history and argument and beauty and ordinary human persistence. Our hotel sat inside it like it had always been there, which was exactly what we had intended. I stepped out onto the sidewalk for a moment, alone, glass in hand. The October air was cool. The street was lit up with the particular gold of a New York evening. Somewhere down the block, someone was playing music from an open window. I thought about the girl from Millfield, Ohio. The scholarship, the suitcase, the $300. Everything she had wanted to build. Look, I thought. Look what we made. I raised my glass to nobody in particular. To the risk. To the walkout. To the 22 people who followed. To every woman who has ever been told her idea is lovely and then watched someone smaller take credit for it. To building something they cannot take from you. To beginning again, completely, fearlessly, on your own terms. Share this story with a woman in your life who is sitting in a job right now feeling invisible. The friend who keeps shrinking herself to fit into someone else's vision. The sister who is talented beyond measure but hasn't been given the room to prove it yet. Maybe this story is the permission she's been waiting for.